Welcome to the April edition of This Month in Payroll for 2025. I'm Rowan Geddes, National Leader of PwC's Payroll Advisory Practice, and it's been a big month. Payday Super, an election campaign, and more. This month we will focus on PwC's suggestions around the new Payday Super legislation made as part of the consultation process, a new court case that expands the reach of portable long service leave schemes in Victoria, and a case that reminds us to take care before making deductions from an employee's wages. First, let's start with Payday Super. Last month saw the long-awaited release of the draft Payday Super legislation, designed to ensure that superannuation guarantee contributions are paid within 7 days of payday rather than each quarter, and bringing with it a heightened penalty regime for non-compliance. Upon release of the draft legislation, Treasury instigated a consultation period aimed at addressing the complexities and operational challenges associated with the new superannuation guarantee reforms. The consultation period ended this month. PwC made a submission covering several matters for consideration, and we've highlighted a few of the payroll-related adjustments here, along with the solutions that we propose to address these. We also made a number of tax-related recommendations, for example, around definition of ordinary time earnings and the retirement of the late payment offset. The first matter for consideration is 7 calendar days for submission, and I expect we won't be alone in calling for this to be 7 business days due to the significant timing challenges that businesses will face, especially around public holidays and weekends. The second recommendation was an extension of time to deal with bounce backs. Noting the high incidences of bounce backs arising from employee error, such as incorrect employee submitted superannuation fund account details, or employees changing their superannuation funds without informing payroll, we have suggested employers be granted an additional 14 business days from the date of receipt of a superannuation bounce back to identify who the refund relates to, contact employees, and remedy and repay the amounts to arrive into the correct superannuation fund accounts. Third, expanding the exceptional circumstances exemption. Under current law, the Tax Office recognises that an employer who did what they reasonably could to comply with the SG legislation should not face a superannuation guaranteed charge where errors arise that are outside of the employer's control. This recognition is absent from the proposed legislation, with only very limited exceptions to the 7-day contribution requirement being allowed. New employees, ATO error in advising of a stapled super fund, out-of-cycle payments, and exceptional circumstances such as natural disasters or widespread technology or communications outages. Accordingly, we have suggested that exceptional circumstances be broadened to include more common issues that are outside of an employer's control, such as systems-based issues, a payroll provider's technology system going down, issues arising due to errors caused by the intermediary or by the super fund, bounce backs occurring due to employees changing their super fund account and not telling their employer, or due to a superannuation fund change such as a merger, of which the employer was not adequately informed. And finally, contractors. Paying SG within a 7-day time frame for contractors will create significant administrative challenges because contractors are typically paid through accounts payable rather than payroll. Organisations typically make payments to contractors multiple times a week due to each contractor's differing payment terms, and contractors are not subject to the standard onboarding process, so it will be more difficult to obtain their choice of fund in a timely manner. Given this complexity, we have recommended that contractor payments be considered out-of-cycle payments, so that the SG is not due until the next normal payment date for employees. Alternatively, we've suggested that an additional 14 days be allowed for SG payments to be made to contractors. The consultation period is now closed, and the Tax Office and Treasury are now in caretaker mode as a result of the federal election. Once the election is over, we look forward to seeing what, if any, changes are made to the draft legislation as a result of the consultation process. In the meantime, we encourage payroll functions to consider their end-to-end payroll processes and identify any parts which could slow down the collection and remittance of superannuation. Expanded Portable Long Service Leave Scheme. Portable long service leave has risen again as a point of focus, this time in Victoria, where 2 decisions, Detector Inspector Proprietary Limited versus Co-Invest Limited, and Energy Australia Proprietary Limited versus Co-Invest Limited, were handed down this month by the Victorian Supreme Court, both of which have the effect of significantly broadening the application of portable long service leave. In Victoria, an employer must pay a long service leave charge equal to 2.7% of the reportable gross wages in respect of every worker employed by the employer to perform construction work in the construction industry. Both Energy Australia and Detector Inspector sought to argue that the portable long service leave scheme did not apply to them because their primary business was not construction, but was the provision of energy and the inspection and maintenance of smoke detectors, respectively. However, the Victorian Supreme Court applied a broad interpretation of what constitutes construction work, finding that, while the predominant purpose of the companies may well be something different to construction, the intent behind the long service leave scheme is to ensure that workers who contribute to the construction industry, whether directly or indirectly, are afforded the benefits of long service leave. In reviewing the tasks performed by the employees, the court found that the Energy Australia employees' work in maintaining and installing energy infrastructure was integral to the construction and maintenance of such infrastructure, while tasks performed by Detector Inspector employees, including the installation and maintenance of smoke detectors, were integral to the construction and maintenance of building safety systems. In both cases, therefore, the court concluded that the employees' duties align with the legislative definition of construction work, bringing them within the scope of the scheme. The impact of these cases are significant to employers operating in Victoria, as the rulings mean that the portable long service leave levy can now extend beyond workers in the construction industry to workers in any industry who perform broadly defined construction activities, such as home and machine maintenance, mandatory building and safety inspections, or plumbing and electrical work. Further, the rulings follow a trend of heightened focus in portable long service leave schemes around the country, including the introduction in New South Wales and South Australia of portable long service leave for community workers, and even consultations that started early last year about the federal government developing a national portable entitlement scheme for insecure workers. At the time, the plans were deferred following feedback from the business community about the amount of industrial relations change happening with the Secure Jobs and Closing Loopholes bills. Both companies are currently considering appealing the Victorian decisions, and we will continue to monitor this and other portable long service leave developments over the coming months. On to other cases, and a reminder this month from the Queensland Industrial Relations Commission about the challenges when it comes to making deductions from an employee's wages. In September 2023, an employee of the Mornington Shire Council, Mr. Bateup, signed a letter of appointment containing the terms and conditions of his employment, which included relocation to Mornington Island. Included in the letter was a clause stating that if the employee resigned within their probation period, they would be required to pay back to the council the relocation expenses paid by council. In December 2023, while still in his probation period, Mr. Bateup resigned from his job, and so the council withheld his final pay, including payment of his accrued leave, to partially account for the relocation costs which it had paid on the employee's behalf. Mr. Bateup applied to the Queensland Industrial Relations Commission to recover the unpaid wages, arguing that when he resigned, no mention was made by the council in relation to repayment of any monies, and so he took this to mean that the council would not be pursuing the recollection. Accordingly, as the council failed to notify him that he owed a debt, it did not have the legal right to garnish his wages regardless of the wording of his employment contract. In response, the council argued that by signing the letter of appointment, Mr. Bateup gave consent to the council to make deductions from his pay. In the ruling, the Industrial Relations Commission observed that an employer had to pay their worker an agreed rate without deduction, unless the employee consented to the deduction. However, the Commission found the manager's signed letter of appointment failed to demonstrate genuine consent by the employee to the council deducting his relocation expenses from his pay, as a blanket acceptance of the terms and conditions of employment of this type does not reflect consent for the specific deduction that ultimately occurred. Instead, the Commissioner preferred a written consent, authorising the specific deduction from Mr. Bateup's wages relating to the relocation expenses, or, if an employee's consent authorising a deduction is not written, before making the deduction, the employer must give the employee written acknowledgement of the consent. In the absence of such consent, the Commissioner found that the Council could not lawfully withhold the cost of relocation for the manager's final pay. This case highlights again the care that must be taken when trying to make deductions from an employee's wages and the need to obtain specific, documented consent at each stage of the decision process. And finally, before we wrap up, a flag about increased Fair Work Ombudsman activity in the aged care industry, where it was announced this month that the FWO had established an aged care services reference group, including employer bodies and the unions, to oversee what it calls a collective approach to policing the aged care sector. Improving compliance in the aged care sector is one of the FWO's stated priority areas because it employs a high number of vulnerable workers, particularly migrant workers, and is an industry that contributes a high number, 12%, of anonymous reports to the regulator around wage compliance and entitlements. Common issues for aged care workers requesting assistance from the FWO include the underpayment of base rates of pay, non-payment for overtime and penalty rates, non-payment of allowances, and non-payment of final entitlements upon leaving their employment. It is also an industry where employers need to stay across the many changes to classifications and minimum pay rates which have taken effect in 2025. As part of this priority area focus, the FWO has just launched a number of compliance activities focusing on pay and entitlements for personal care workers, nurses, and nursing assistants, as well as focusing on record keeping. Factors which drove the compliance activities included receipt of anonymous reports from employees made to the FWO, employment of international visa holders, and the employer's history of non-compliance with the Fair Work Act. And that's it for our April edition of This Month in Payroll. If you would like to revisit any of our prior updates, they are available on our website at pwc.com.au/payroll. And if you have any questions or need for support, please reach out to myself or your usual PwC contact. Until next time, have a great month in payroll.